Recognizing Peace River North.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to stand here today and give my 2 bits on Bill 28, the Zero Emissions Vehicle Act. Certainly going to come from it from a perspective of rural BC, of course speaking on behalf of the great constituents of Peace River North, and certainly how this bill is going to have significant impact on more rural and remote areas of British Columbia. We've heard in the House here many times how diverse our province is, which is great, and I think we all embrace the diversity that we have in our province. From up in my area where we have I look to the west and I see the Rocky Mountains, and I look to the east and I can see Winnipeg, with the prairies and the vast agriculture. Moving over to the coast, of course, with the ocean, down into the interior where we have the wine region. I mean, this is what makes British Columbia beautiful, fantastic, and the diversity is what I certainly appreciate from our province. However, often when we see these bills come forward, policies coming forward with a cookie-cutter approach, and it is something that even before, when I served in local government, we would see government come out with cookie-cutter policies that might work well here in Vancouver, or here in Victoria or Vancouver, but does not work well for Fort St. John or Kelowna or Terrace for that matter. And I think that this is one such policy, this is one such bill that I don't think has taken into consideration British Columbia's diversity. And it is definitely a cookie-cutter approach. And when I see places like Fort St. John and our winters, and I'll briefly define winter in the North Piece, and the South Piece would be very similar. Usually a little warmer, he says, just a smidge. My children they get to wear Halloween costumes, but it's usually under their snowsuit, because usually about mid to end October, that's when the temperature is dropping down to about -10, -15, even colder sometimes. And it just keeps going down and down. By the time we're hitting toward the end of November, we're usually hovering around the -25 to -30 mark, and it's usually in and about there between -15 and -30, right through until, this year, right through until March. And I think it's important to keep that in mind when we're talking about electric vehicles. And, just before I came here today, you just have to do a quick search. There's lots of research on batteries, the lithium-ion batteries, which is now the main battery that's used in electric cars, and how the cold weather impacts these batteries. And I found it quite funny. A lot of these, this is a lot of American information, so bear with me. But they're talking about when a battery is cold, they know for a fact that the battery performs less efficiently, does not hold a charge as long. In fact, a 20% reduction in energy from the battery on temperatures from 32 degrees Fahrenheit to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Now put that in perspective, 20 degrees Fahrenheit is -6. And we're already looking at losing 20% reduction in capacity and output at -6. Well, -6, that's a September temperature in Fort St. John, maybe an early October temperature. As it gets colder, the research shows that there's permanent damage to batteries. Some of the recommendations, and I printed off of them, and this is from I think it's from the Tesla website, tips for driving while cold. I'll read a couple of them here. But this one, turn off your wipers in the winter to avoid damage. I mean, when it's snowing and we have ice and everything else, so I'm not too sure how we're going to do that. Preheat and warm up the cabin as well as the battery for at least 20 minutes prior to driving your car. A lot of people don't have garages in Fort St. John and Fort Nelson, Dawson Creek, and other communities. People that live in apartments, they have to park outside. Expect substantial range reduction in the cold. I've already talked a little bit about that. Short trips dramatically reduce the range in cold temperatures. Well, when it's 40 below, you're going to be driving to the grocery store. You're going to have to drive to pick your kids up at school. Then you're going to be driving them to your couple to the sporting events that each of your children attend. You might have to go to your employment. You might need your car as a delivery service. So short trips in cold is a no-no for electric vehicles. Talk about limiting use of brakes. Turn on the chill mode. Okay, I think minus 40 is a little bit beyond chill. Park in a garage or covered area. I talked about that. Again, a lot of people do not have garages or even covered ports. I mean, I'm not sure the number of apartments that we have just in Fort St. John, but there are a significant amount of people that live in apartments or live in townhouses that park on the street and will not have access to this. It is strongly recommended, and remember, we're talking -6. -6. I could not find anything other than talking about extreme temperatures, which is critically harmful to batteries. But at -6, strongly recommended that you use a battery heater when you're charging in the cold. Not 110 volt, as it cannot keep up. So there opens up a whole new range of infrastructure that I know my house doesn't have. Well, I guess my dryer plug-in is a 220. The oven, I think, is the other one that's 220. I guess I could get an extension cord and run it from out there. I don't know. But my point, Madam Speaker, on this is we're talking 20 years from now. I don't think any of us in this chamber or that work in this place argue the fact that we want to reduce our emissions. We want to see improvements on how we, what we're going to leave behind for our children and our grandchildren. But I also need to stress the point that with the diversity of this province, we also need to take a realistic approach at when we are introducing any kind of legislation in this House. And I don't believe Bill 28 has it for just some of these reasons. So I talked a little bit about I talked briefly about the freezing. Again, we're talking -40 sometimes for up to 7 or 8 days, up to an entire week. In February this year, I think we had in excess, 10 to 15 days where we were below 30 below consecutive. So when I see, permanent damage for frozen batteries, significantly impact the ability to hold a charge from batteries freezing, that's going to be a fact of life for electric vehicles up in the Northeast, up in the Northwest. I mean, Terrace gets 20 below weather. Prince George gets 20, 30 below weather. Again, I mean, this is much easier, I would say certainly to have in the Lower Mainland or here in the island, but it's not going to work in regards to the extreme temperatures that we experience in the north. Another thing, distances. We have great distances to travel when you leave the Lower Mainland. Your distances to travel to go shopping, distances to travel to go to schools, everything increases. And it increases more as you head further north. And just an example, you know, my riding alone, and I've talked about it, you know, a lot in this chamber. I mean, my riding's almost 170,000 square kilometers. You know, it's the size of 4 small European countries. And when we talk about batteries having a 300-mile range, 200 miles in the cold weather, and when I say 200 miles, that's 321 kilometers. And remember, when they're talking cold temperatures and all the stuff I found here, that's -6. So when it's -30 or -40, we could significantly reduce that again. And I'm not even sure what it goes down to. Maybe 100 miles is all. So, Madam Speaker, when I look at even just maybe traveling to Fort Nelson, which I do so every 4 to 6 weeks, to visit my constituents up in Fort Nelson. I have an office in Fort Nelson. And when I go up there, we're talking upwards of 500 kilometers with a little community called 101. That's roughly 70 kilometers north of Fort St. John. Another small, and when I say community, I should say a service station and some houses. The next place is mile 143, Pink Mountain, which has got a service station. And when you get north of that, there's nothing. Certainly no charging stations up in that north of Fort St. John. So what are people to do that need to travel between Fort St. John and Fort Nelson? We've talked lots in this house as well about rural health care. People in the north, people in rural BC, have to travel significant distances to obtain specialty health care. People in Fort Nelson, they cannot have a baby. There are no maternity services in Fort Nelson. They are advised to go to Fort St. John 3 weeks prior to their due date and have their baby in Fort St. John. And now, I can talk about the healthcare issue. That's a complete another issue. I'll save that for another day. But people have to travel from Fort Nelson to have their baby. They have to travel to Fort St. John, 450 plus kilometers. This puts people at risk on a remote highway. You know, and yes, there's vehicles going back and forth. But in the wintertime, I've driven that highway before. If you're traveling at night because you need medical treatment in Fort St. John, there's not a lot of vehicles that travel that highway. And I guess they're all going to be electric in 2040 anyway, so everybody's going to be facing the same concerns and same issues. But it puts people at risk that have to do this. Prince George is the home of the Northern Cancer Center. The province has put significant amount of money into that, which is a great thing. There are a lot of people in Fort St. John or Dawson Creek, Fort Nelson, other areas that have to drive on a regular basis from Fort St. John to Prince George to receive medical treatment, to receive cancer treatment, as well as other specialty treatments. Prince George is 438 kilometers from Fort St. John. The range is not there, especially again if we go back into the winter months. I have real concern that the range is ever going to be there. Technology will improve. We know that technology will improve. But I don't think in 20 years that we will be to that point to make these significant changes and mandate that everybody buy an EV by 2040. A lot of people, again, travel to Edmonton for appointments, for medical appointments. Edmonton is much easier to get to for us than going down to Vancouver. We're talking a difference of a 15-and-a-half-hour drive versus a 7-hour drive. So a lot of people get referred to Edmonton for specialty appointments. So we're talking almost 700 kilometers now. Now, granted, you go through a couple communities, the city of Grand Prairie, which it's approximately, I think it's in the area of about 50,000 people. Thereabouts, 50,000 people. They currently have 2 charging stations, by the way, in Grand Prairie only. And I think Whitecourt would be the next town that has a charging station. But people are traveling, again, great distances on vehicles that will not have that capacity unless you're going to stop somewhere and charge. And again, this is Alberta, and I don't foresee Alberta bringing in this legislation anytime soon. But people are still going to be required to travel to Edmonton to go to their appointments, because we won't have an internal combustion engine to drive. We will be taking an electric vehicle into Alberta, where who knows what the infrastructure is going to look like in Grand Prairie. Again, it's a city of almost 60,000 people. They've got 2 stations today. I didn't look how many charging stations Edmonton has. I know they do have obviously some, but what is that going to look like in just 20 years from now? Again, it's unique up in the northeast corner because there is a lot of movement of people between British Columbia and Alberta. A lot of movement, whether we're talking commerce, whether we're talking medical appointments, and like I said, there's a lot of people that go to Edmonton and Grand Prairie for that matter for medical treatment. There's a lot of people that work, of course, with the oil and gas industry back and forth. A lot of work that happens in between the 2 provinces. How is that going to work? And when, you know, where did I put it here? You know, in the bill it talks about, I want to get it right, light-duty motor vehicles. Light-duty motor vehicles, a half-ton pickup and under. Well, a lot of people up there have a half-ton pickup because they require that for employment. They require that if they work in the oil and gas industry when we're hauling around, you know, a quad that, you know, a surveyor that requires a quad to go surveying in the backcountry. The tools that are required to do a lot of jobs that are required up there. There is a requirement to have a pickup. And a half-ton pickup is significantly cheaper than when you start going in, of course, your 3/4 ton or your 1-ton pickups. And I think there's also the luxury tax that starts playing a role there as well, where a half-ton pickup would not capture or be captured under that. But when you go up into, you know, a 1-ton vehicle or other, it will be. So again, a cookie-cutter approach that is, you know, penalizing people that are required to do certain things that aren't required elsewhere. So one of the biggest concerns then that I do have for rural BC and the people in my riding is the traveling of great distances. The traveling of great distances, not because they just want to, but the traveling great distances because we have to. We need to go to these medical appointments. We need to go to Edmonton. We need to go to Prince George. And I might also add too, you know, driving to Prince George, you got to go through one of BC's passes, the Pine Pass, you know, which often isn't the greatest pass to be going through in the winter. And once you get out of Chetwynd, you've got one little gas station at Mackenzie Junction, which does not have a charging station, by the way. And I'm not sure if they will have a charging station in 20 years from now. So I just see so many issues with this legislation for my riding and certainly for more rural ridings, you know, that are going to be challenged on just access to the infrastructure around it. And I'm not going to belabor the point here. It's been talked about numerous times by my colleagues, but it is an issue, and it will be an issue. Even Fort St. John, there's only 2 charging stations in Fort St. John, and people, you know, there are a couple vehicles that are electric vehicles. They don't drive in the winter, by the way. I've never seen an electric car in the winter, but I do see them in the summertime. So those people must have a garage that they can park it in and keep it warm all summer, or sorry, all winter. But you know, even then, those 2 electric charging stations in the summer, you know, people just park at them, plug their car in, and they're there all day long. So I see significant issues coming that way as well. So we've talked about consumption of electricity. You know, Site C, of course, is in my backyard. It's roughly about 8 kilometers away from my home. You know, there was lots of opposition in this chamber by government side initially about Site C. As BC electrifies, and when I say electrifies, I'm talking a push to move to more electric vehicles, a push to move away from fossil fuels. So we're talking heating homes, heating apartments. We're talking even in industry, a move off of fossil fuels to electric-driven motors. There is a massive move to electrify British Columbia. And when you layer, of course, the electric vehicles onto this, and I'm just going to go a little off here. You know, I talked earlier from the Tesla website about plugging in the extra battery warmer in the wintertime. You know, there's already incredible surge on the grid right now that pushes it to the limits in the wintertime when everyone's heaters are on, things are always plugged in. We are almost right now at maximum capacity. Now, when we start, and again, 20 years is not very far away. And when we start driving all of this stuff, pardon the pun, onto our electrical grid, as mentioned here before, we're going to need 3 Site C equivalents to put everything onto the grid that we are pushing toward. Where is that going to come from? Well, and I know where it's going to come from. Well, I don't know where it's going to come from, but I know who's going to be paying for it. And it's going to be every single one of us as British Columbians paying for this incredible push of required infrastructure. There will be significant costs to do this. We've already, again, seen challenges about how some of this is going to be drawing onto our grid. I wonder what the plan is for our communities that are not on the grid. I've got communities in my riding, Toad River. I've got 2 First Nations communities, Quadacha, Sekedene, both First Nation communities. They're off grid. They run on diesel generation. How is this going to impact them for them to be required to have electric vehicles in these remote areas that don't have access to the BC Hydro grid? There's no plan, there's no talk about that in this bill. And I'm sure there's other communities in my riding that aren't on the grid that are on diesel. But those are 3 fairly significant communities that are in my riding. So I would be really curious to see what the plan is for some of these communities that are remote on diesel power generation, and how they're going to be, how that's going to work. Actually, if I believe even Fort Nelson is not on the BC Hydro grid. They're through cogeneration at the gas plant, the Spectra gas plant. So there are some significant challenges that I don't see addressed in this bill. So, and I'd be curious. Again, these would be certain questions that I'll be asking in committee stage as well. You know, I'm not sure if it's been mentioned or not, just about the aspect of the lithium and the mining of lithium. Like any resource in our world, lithium is a finite resource. Right now, lithium is mainly being mined in Australia, Chile, Argentina, China, Zimbabwe. Those are the top 5 countries that mine lithium. Well, as we start talking about a resource being depleted, what happens with that resource? It goes up in value. Electric cars are already only pretty much affordable to people because of significant subsidies. I will guarantee, Madam Speaker, that as lithium becomes a rarer resource, that the cost to produce electric cars is going to increase significantly. Maybe the word astronomically even comes to mind when you start having something that's well, look at gas prices. You know, we're talking about a supply issue right now, and we've seen gas prices go off the charts. Well, imagine what's going to happen when lithium gets down to that end piece where it's rare. Now, granted, there are recycling stations, but the recycling of these batteries is nowhere near able to absorb what is expected. And if we look, and I don't have the number here, but I did see something on, in 2040, the amount of batteries that will need to be recycled is an incredible number. And they don't expect the recycling facilities to be anywhere near capable to be handling all the batteries that will need to be recycled. So again, I think we're kind of putting the cart before the horse. That's a double pun as well. It's not bad, right? Not bad at all. This is the cheap entertainment you get here today, folks. So I want to make sure I don't miss anything on my incredible notes here that I was making. Oh, great, thank you. Oh, wonderful. I also want to talk briefly, just to mention a comment on the member for Oak Bay, Gordon Head, who mentioned earlier today that you know, he was talking. Can't remember, is that 5 or 2? 2 minutes. You know, he was talking about when you buy an electric vehicle, you drive it off the parking lot, and you never have to go back to the dealership until you buy your next electric car. Well, I'm sorry. I'm going to call him out on that. There are issues, just like every other car has. There's powertrain issues. The number one issue right now on new vehicles are electrical issues. And they're the most expensive and hardest to diagnose in a car. And electric cars are no different. So I just want to call him out that, you know, he made it sound when you buy an electric car, you drive it off the parking lot, and you're hassle-free, you know, for the entire time you own your vehicle. Well, that is just not true. There are equal amounts of issues that can happen and do happen to electric cars as any other car. Just finally, you know, talking about Alberta, myself, Peace River South, actually even more so, where you are right against, you're 1 hour from Grand Prairie. You know, I just wonder the challenges that are going to be as people are, obviously, again, I mentioned Alberta is not going to change much, I don't think, moving to, I certainly don't think they're going to be beating us on a move toward electric vehicles. But there's going to be significant challenges as well, I think, having certainly our border communities that border on the Alberta, with Alberta. There's going to be challenges to bring, having gas vehicles being sold, 1 hour away from Dawson Creek in Grand Prairie. So I think these are some challenges that we're going to have to be looking at. Anyways, Madam Speaker,
Thank you, Member.
I'm looking forward to committee stage, and I'll take my place.